again. Welcome to Oracle Database Administration, Competency 2. I'd like to spend a couple of seconds and talk about Competency 1 before we get into Competency 2. Remember that Competency 1 is basically was just a review. It talked about some of the concepts of a database, the normalization, the primary keys. It talked about SQL, it talked about PL SQL, and kind of reviewed general information. It really wasn't anything new. So that was just kind of a baseline review before we get into, or a refresher course. Let's just call it a small refresher before we get into the meat of the course. Now, Competency 2. Before we get into some of those items, I need to kind of set a baseline of what's happening here. A database is a tool that is designed to support the operational needs of an organization. So it is a tool designed to support the needs of the organization. You are going to be the manager of an operation that has been predetermined, pre-designed to satisfy a need. So your job is to make sure that this process satisfies the need. So what we're going to look at in Competency 2 is the steps in the development of the resources that will be required to support an organization. And we'll begin with, like Chapter 4 talks about planning, which is kind of a broad term that's not really specific. In this context, we're talking about the evaluation of licensing. The licensing is which tool you're going to buy, small, medium, or large, which goes back to the races. So first thing you got to do is figure out, what is my problem? What is the tool I need for this problem? Now, once you do that, in that quarter-mile scenario, you have one location. So all the resources are localized. In a 24-hour thing of Le Mans, where you have maybe a Grand Prix where you have long distances, you might have to have shared resources or distributed resources to be able to cover the scope of the work. So as you're doing this, part of what you're doing in the planning is when you're going to buy a tool, you have to figure out the architect. Is it going to be kind of monolithic, shared, distributed, depending on what's going on? So one of the deals is to try to figure out the right size of database you're going to need. An example, you're going to develop a database for a doctor's office. And let's say a doctor will see 4 patients in 1 hour. So that's about 15 minutes per patient. Okay, now just to pick a number out of the air, you're going to collect 1 gig of information per patient. So that means that you're collecting 4 gig of information per hour. You're open 8 hours, that's 32 times 5 days. That's 160 gig of information that you have requirements for 1 week. Okay? Now, after you have this information, you also have to develop, well, how am I going to back up this information? How am I going to archive this information? How am I going to secure this information? So Chapter 1 talks about this process of establishing minimum requirements, but also understanding that, okay, let's say this doctor's office has 1 physician. Well, as time goes on, he's going to have a partner. So he now has 2 or 3 physicians in this office. So you have to make sure that whatever you do has the ability to be scalable. One of the things that happens that I've noticed is a database usually is designed to solve an immediate information need. And organizations tend to not look beyond tomorrow. And they reach a point where all of a sudden the tool that they have to solve a problem is no longer the right fit. So part of what you need to do is plan for the scalability of what you're going to do. What do you perceive the future to bring? And have the ability to adapt to changing environments. So chapter 4 talks about the licensing issue, the designing issue, whether it's going to be kind of monolithic or shared or distributed depending on your need, and like distributed or shared. So you have a north, central, and south office. So you would have to have some mechanism to collect the data between these offices. So chapter 4 speaks to planning and choosing the appropriate size of the database. Now Oracle has the Standard Edition, the Enterprise Edition, and the Express Edition, or some of the smaller editions. Now the Standard Edition, some of them have limitations on how many CPUs they're going to use, 4 CPUs. So depending on the size of the organization, you would have to do a calculation on what size you need. When I was doing this way back in the before time, there was a 3-ring binder that Oracle provided, and it was basically a template. And as you read this template or this recipe, it would ask you questions and you would fill in numbers. As you turn the pages, at the end of it, it will tell you, well, based on how you filled out all this information, this is what our recommendation is. So what you could do is look at some of the websites. There are some websites out there that have these pre-printed or templates that say if you fill it out based on the information you provided, this is what you'll probably be needing. So once again, in closing out chapter 4, which talks about planning, it talks about licensing, small, medium, large scenario. It talks about the architecture, which will be kind of monolithic, shared, or distributed. It also addresses the size of what you're going to be needing. So that concludes chapter 4.